Respected speaker, respected professor, respected speaker, Professor Ranjan Kumar Panda, respected guest of honor, Professor Gopal Sahu, and dear students and dear research scholars. Very good morning to all of you. Have a very good day to all of you. I am Rajivalochan Behra, Assistant Professor of Philosophy, Department of Philosophy and Religion at Banaras Hindu University. It gives me immense pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to this seminar in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at BHU. On behalf of the department, I would like to declare the seminar is open now. As we open this seminar, it gives us a great pleasure to welcome you all again. As you all know that the purpose of seminar, the main purpose of our seminar is to cultivate philosophy in a proper way. And our department found that this is the proper way to cultivate philosophy. It discusses about almost all branches of philosophy. Today we will discuss about philosophy of mind, more specifically about biological naturalism and its voice and silence on consciousness. At the very outset, I convey my best regard to our HOD, Professor Anand Mishra sir, Pranam, who is the backbone of this seminar. I express my gratitude and I welcome you, sir, to this seminar. I would like to invite you to introduce our guest, sir.
So,
Sir.
respected Chairperson Professor Durgas Chaudhary ji, our learned speaker Professor Ranjan Panda ji, guest of honor Professor Gopal Sahu ji, convener of the seminar Dr. Rajiv Lochan Behra ji, Dr. Neeti ji, our colleagues, students, scholars connected to the seminar, I welcome you all in this Saturday seminar. Friends, it is a proud privilege of us that Professor R.K. Panda is with us. Professor Panda is professor at IIT Mumbai, and he is a very serious scholar of philosophy of mind. Professor Panda would today speak on biological naturalism. I am sure that we shall be benefited by his lecture. Professor Panda, I welcome you, sir, on behalf of our own department and all my colleagues. I welcome you, sir. I also welcome Professor Gopal Sahu, who is presently head of the Department of Philosophy, Allahabad University. He is a student of IIT Mumbai. Now he is a head of the Department of Allahabad University. He is also an expert of philosophy of mind and epistemology, Western epistemology, I welcome you, sir, in this seminar. Our chairperson today is Professor Durgas Chaudhary. Who has been a scholar of philosophy of Wittgenstein. He has worked on Tarski and Davidson. I welcome Professor Chaudhary in your own department in this Saturday seminar. Finally, I extend a warm welcome to Professor D.A. Gangadhar sir, Professor S.P. Pandey, Professor Raj Kishore, and a number of other scholars, our faculties, students who are connected to the seminar. All of you are most welcome in the seminar. Thank you, Rajiv ji. Thank you.
Raju sir, please unmute.
Sorry, sir. Pranam, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Now I express my heartfelt gratefulness to our guest of honor of this seminar, Professor Gopal Sahu, Professor of Philosophy and Head.
I am sorry for that. He would rejoin very soon. दिग्विजय जी क्या
What happened, Digvijay?
सर लगता है सर अपने चेंबर में है, वहाँ नेटवर्क का कुछ प्रॉब्लम है सर। अगर दोबारा से रिज्वाइन करेंगे तो ठीक हो जाए।
राजीव जी, तो राजीव जी को मैं वो करो ना,
जी सर।
उनके ऊपर कमरे में बोल दो, बल्कि ना हो तो चले आवे नीचे, हमारे कमरे में आ जाए या नीचे आ जाए।
जी सर।
I think it is better to.
Sir, I'm sorry, sir, for this technical issue. I should continue. Now, Professor Sahu has published more than 50 papers and so many edited books and conference proceedings. And he has also presented many papers in various conferences and seminars. Sir, I welcome you to this seminar. And I thank you so much for your gracious acceptance of our invitation. Yeah. I am very honored and delighted to welcome a most distinguished speaker, Professor Ranjan Kumar Panda, Professor of Philosophy, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Society, Bombay. Professor Panda has awarded MA, MPhil and PhD degree from Central University, Hyderabad. He has also awarded ICPR JRF, and his research interests are philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, philosophy of education, and environmental ethics. Professor Panda has published several books, and he has reviewed many books, and he has also published many articles in many pre-reviewed journals. He has presented large number of research papers in seminar and conferences in both international and national. He has guided good number of scholars from MPhil, PhD, and postdoc. Sir, we are grateful for your gracious acceptance to speak on the topic titled Biological Naturalism, Its Voice and Silence on Consciousness. And also I would like to invite respected president of the seminar, Professor Durgas Chaudhary, I am indeed and delighted to welcome you to this seminar. We will preside this seminar. He is the Professor of Philosophy, Department of Philosophy and Religion at BHU. He is the eminent professor, and his areas of specializations are philosophy of language, philosophy of Wittgenstein and Donald Davidson. Sir, I welcome you to this seminar. I would also like to invite Dr. Simi Singh, Assistant Professor of Philosophy, Department of Philosophy and Religion at BHU. She is so vibrant and energetic young professor in our department. She will present vote of thanks of the seminar. Ma'am, I welcome you to this seminar. Now, I would like to invite our speaker, distinguished speaker, Professor Ranjan Kumar Panda. Sir.
Thank you, Rajiv, for this kind introduction. And I'm really privileged to be with all of you. I pay my gratitude to all the learned participants and most especially to Professor Anand Misra ji for extending this kind invitation. Professor Sri Prakash Pandey ji for this warm association with me for last few months. Professor Durgas Chaudhary, the president of this webinar today, Professor Gopal Sahu, the guest of honor, and Professor Gangadhar, Professor Ganesh Prasad Das, and many my colleague Professor Rajkishore Nath, and the learned participants. I thank you all for being here with me, and I would like to read the paper. So I have already drafted a paper. This is a working paper in this sense that I would expect your comments and suggestions to improve the paper in future, and that is how I expect in the beginning of the paper. The title of my paper is Biological Naturalism, Its Voice and Silence on Consciousness. The study of consciousness has many voices, and also some of its studies resulted in silence. The voices are many in terms of developing multiple perspectives on consciousness. Nevertheless, the silence exhibits a limit concerning their explanation. In the discourse of philosophy, consciousness has its theorization has been as old as humanity. In the Indian philosophical tradition, philosophizing begins with a meditative inquiry concerning consciousness. Many philosophical systems have questioned and voiced against its ontology. Some have ultimately resolved that everything gets melted in the ontology of consciousness because it is only real. This voice indeed has led philosophers to a different form of silence, which has often been characterized as inexpressible, mystical, and so on. The philosophers of 21st century are struggling still to demystify the ontology of silence. This struggle has many strategic concerns and has taken us to a different level of consciousness. But the mystery is yet to melt down. As many of us know, the struggle has been to meaningfully expedite the question, that is, what consciousness is. Moreover, importantly, to pinpoint its locus so that its ontology can be systematically demonstrated. However, does its demonstration enough to silence the prime concern that humanity has raised right from the Vedic and Upanishadic period? One might ask, what is the prime concern that had motivated the philosophical community to meditate on its struggle concerning self-knowledge, to know the reality as a whole and as such? The question concerning the knowledge of ontology of consciousness and knowing oneself are not conceptually alienated questions. Instead, their conceptual proximity has directed us to reflect coherently on the metaphysical, epistemological, axiological study of consciousness. The study of consciousness viewed even from epistemology, ethics, aesthetics could be equally significant to strengthen the metaphysical ground of consciousness. Philosophers, the contemporary study of consciousness has been benefited a lot from the study of brain, from Galen. That is, Galen is a philosopher from the ancient Greece. Study on brain in the 1st century AD to the recent time. Many significant parts of the brain are scientifically investigated, and their functions are known. The success of this scientific study has influenced many philosophers of mind to develop their philosophical theories based on the hypothesis that consciousness is the brain processes. Moreover, later on Francis Crick's work, most astounding hypothesis delved into the study of a human soul while trying to explain the mental activity with the biological processes of different kinds of cells that constitute the organism. Crick maintains that consciousness, including thoughts, imagination, visual, and self-consciousness experiences, and soul can be explained scientifically by knowing the nature, the micro level function of the cells. Moreover, some have emphasized that overall coordination between the central nervous system and the brain can define the organism's conscious and subconscious movements. Behaviors or the movement of the body as a whole is necessary for the interaction with the environment. Measuring the mode of interaction and tracing its neural correlates for the coordination function demands advanced technology to measure consciousness empirically. Undoubtedly, the measuring procedure is a complex activity and also demands the involvement of various disciplinary research programs in this direction. And it is mostly happening in the field of cognitive science today. The multifaceted investigation are carried out to identify explicitly or to find out the minimal neural correlates, as Chalmers says, is sufficient for the content of consciousness. However, some deny the universal correlates of consciousness. No doubt, it is a challenging task to answer questions such as how is consciousness produced, how does it exist, and why does consciousness exist? The above stated hypothesis might still work for answering the first question, but for a philosopher, these questions demand a thorough conceptual analysis to measure their significance. Further, it could be stated here that artificial intelligence theory has well articulated a model to answer the first two questions. Robotic engineering has progressed so much after Alan Turing's initiation of a Turing machine test, where he assumed the success of digital computing. Machines learning and big data studied in data science are central themes of research that contributed to the explanation of the cognitive ability of human mind. A functional explanation of an artificial cognitive system shows how the mind works or how consciousness exists at the functional or subpersonal level of human organism. Many philosophers have been influenced by the development of artificial intelligence and try to conceive that consciousness is a product of the sophisticated digital machine, so can compete performing various activities along with the human beings, but are capable of undertaking hard and physically challenging tasks in many odd situations. where human might find it difficult to survive. Machine intelligence is functionally explainable, leading to answer the questions and mystifying the ontology of consciousness. Many functionalist philosophers have accepted the consciousness has no ontology. Instead, it has a physical ontology. Thus, consciousness is treated as an epiphenomena in the theorization of artificial intelligence. Biological naturalism voices against this very assumption that consciousness can be artificially produced. Consciousness is instead a biological phenomenon. Biological naturalism gives due importance to evolutionary biology and maintains that brain processes are the cause of consciousness. John Searle, the propounder of this theory of mind, claims that consciousness is caused by the brain processes and realized in brain processes. Once consciousness is caused, they have their own life, claims Searle. There is a realm of the mental phenomena, or what we call mind, is constituted of the network of mental states, which are realized in brain processes. In other words, the neurophysiology of the brain is such that it produces consciousness or mental states, and these mental states are realized in the brain processes. Hence, the brain remains a vital part of human organism to perform consciousness and unconscious movements. In the vocabulary of philosophy of mind, Searle unfolds a theory of emergence that shows both bottom-up and top-down causal processes to explain the question of how consciousness works and how consciousness is produced. Nevertheless, Searle, while showing a top-down causal relationship, does not commit to reductionism that other emergentists like Javan Kim, who argues for overdetermination and thereby suggests that the realm of the mental state is only causally inefficacious state, and the neurophysiological processes of the brain perform the essential works. For Kim, though mental states are emerging from brain processes, but still act as epiphenomena. The non-reductionistic approach of biological naturalism has made it popular because for several reasons. It argues that mental states are intentional. Biological naturalism advocates a causal account of intentionality rather than the phenomenological account of thoughts and experiences having intentionality as an intrinsic feature of consciousness. Because intentionality is common to all biological phenomena, according to Searle, is exceptionally sophisticated in the case of human beings. And the intentional content of thoughts and experience are this feature of sophistication or the production of that sophisticated function of the human intentionality. Over and above, it claims that the intentional nature of mental states exhibit propositional attitudes. For instance, having desire or belief or intention as primary mental states are the bearer of a propositional attitude that whenever we have a desire of something, or when I express that a desire, then this expression is expressed in the language that refers to the object of the desire. So desire, intention, beliefs, etc. exhibit an intentional content that shows a kind of fitness with the world. And this fitness is an intentional fitness. The intentional directional fit of any linguistic expression presupposes the intentionality of consciousness, according to Searle. Intentionality is an intrinsic feature of consciousness that builds the structure of mental states and the network of mental states that constitute the mind per se. Mental states are structured by intentionality and disclose other features, the functional features, such as subjectivity, phenomenality, prospectivity, and the condition of satisfaction. The first person perspective does disclose human subjectivity and its function in an intentional mode of interaction with the environment. The intentional attitude entails that there is consciousness, or there is an operation of consciousness which is ontologically fundamental. Searle accepts only the epistemic significance of human subjectivity, does not concede the ontology of subjectivity. By saying that consciousness shares the biological intentionality, rather intentionality, neither intentionality nor consciousness and its constituting mental features have a separate ontology. Rather, they all have a physical ontology because they are ultimately caused by the brain processes and realized in brain processes. The understanding the theoretical position is challenging, since he refutes the property dualism and strongly argues against the Cartesian substance dualism. Biological naturalism thus does not straightforwardly fit into the philosophical claim of any theory of mind or consciousness. Rather, has a view of its own, which is logical and consistent in its approach to the explanation of consciousness. But as Searle admits, there are gaps. These gaps need to be eventually filled up by developing specific conceptual frameworks, which possibly is a way out to strengthen a case against reductionism. To understand the gaps, we need to reflect on the function of intentionality. The operation of intentionality happens in 3 levels, as a result of which it constitutes essential layers in comprehending the ontology of the reality. The first level of intentionality is about the biological function of a living organism that interacts with its environment. The second level is the intentionality of thoughts and deeds. And the last level is the intentionality of the rules and the institutions operating in the realm of the social. Searle's theorization of intentionality integrates these 3 levels by showing how it is caused and realized. The intentionality of the mind or mental states are thus, as we have already mentioned, are realized in the neurophysiological processes of the brain or the body. The living system, the brain, and the other parts are causally integrated. It is a biological system that has evolved over a period of time. Hence, each living species are an instance of a complete organic system capable of functioning independently in the environment. Human environments are not merely explained with unconscious bodily movements, rather through conscious voluntary movements. Human actions are voluntary and exhibit the will of the individual. As actions are intentionally performed, they are all intentionally explained. The reason of this explanation of action is not causal, somewhat intentional in the Searlean theoretical framework. The third level is an outcome of its intentional performative character of action, where Searle explains that social institutions are the social institutions are formed by the collective expression of the will or the intentionality that we all share. It is we intentionality, according to Searle. Institutions are based on rules. They have a normative structure that regulates our action. These three layers of intentionality operate in three different levels, but ultimately the ontology is primarily physical for Searle, even if he distinguishes between the biological and the physical. Since Searle strongly argues against reductionism, he still does not concede that consciousness is ontologically fundamental. The reality of consciousness is merely functional because it is the source of thoughts and experiences. The experiential, reflective, and rational form of intentionality creates room for the mind that is irreducible to mere functional feature of brain processes. Biological naturalism, to some extent, silently holds an internalist account of the mind that succeeds in forming a first-person perspective. It could be reiterated here that the first-person perspective has epistemological significance rather than its ontology. That is to say that my experiences are mine, our experiences are respectively subjective, but this subjectivity is not ontologically fundamental. However, Searle claims that experiences are fundamental so far as the content of intentional states are concerned. The content is internal to the intentional states, and he claims that people do have them. This is a kind of a realism that he talks about. People do have the mental states. This account of content determination entails internalism, whereas to assert that people possess the content is a case of realism. The experiential condition of determining the reference is construed by the mental states, which have functions like having the direction of feed and condition of satisfaction. For example, to say that I am thirsty, the experience of thirst is undoubtedly a representation of a first person's account of my being having the feeling of thirst. However, to indicate to a glass of water on the table or to look for water is connected to the condition of my desire. To have glass of water certainly satisfies the desire of having it. That is how the desire is intentionally connected to the world. To have the glass of water certainly satisfies the desire of having it. And this satisfaction is an important feature of human intentionality or consciousness. To have a glass of, thus, the condition of satisfaction plays an essential role in determining what is intended. The intentional analysis of covering the causal relationship between thirst, and water is explained through a self-referential relation, not exclusively a causal account of content articulated by the externalist. Thus, Searle provides an internalist account of experience of the content, where he finds that external cause is unnecessary so far as the constitution of content is concerned. The constitution of content is the source of the condition of satisfaction, Hence, Searle resolves it in his own theory of internalism. Achille Bilgrami has critiqued this notion of internalism that Searle advocates. According to Bilgrami, internalism maintained by Searle's theorization of intentionality does not explicitly claim that it is a metaphysical intuition. Unquote. Searle is relatively silent about this because that might trap him on the Cartesian net of substance dualism. Biological naturalism thrives on the postulates that everything has evolved following evolutionary biologist's schema and presupposes an atomic theory of matter. Dualism thus could be ruled out in the theoretical framework of biological naturalism. If that is the case, then mind, experience in particular, is supervening on the neurophysiological conditions. And what happens to this idea of supervenience, which Searle's biological naturalism entails? Searle is indeed silent about this supervening feature of mental states. Bilgrami also questions the science of mind leaves out agent's relation to the external thing. Moreover, if external things constitute the content of intentional states, then the content will not fit the intentional agents or the states of intentional agents. Looking at this above criticism, one might also ask whether biological naturalism maintains any kind of dualism. The naturalistic stance eliminates this burden of Cartesian threat. Instead, it suggests a connection between life and the world or nature as a whole. The elements of nature and natural forces do causally interact with all living systems, including human life. Since Searle's biological naturalism does not accept a general emergentist account of mind emerging from the brain processes, it doesn't uphold that concept of supervenience, which states that mind is supervening on the neurophysiological processes of the brain. This is indeed very hard to accept when one is arguing in favor of science of the mind. Instead, Searle admits a gap in explaining the brain processes and the mental states causing action. Here, he suggests that everything has a micro-level existence, and this level, the explanation is different from its macro-level existence. For instance, a table has its identity because of its function as a table and having a hard surface. Moreover, this explains a table that depends on what we have experienced of the object called table. This explanation for Searle is a macro level explanation, whereas if someone would like to know how scientifically the concept of hardness has come into being, then we need to look at what is its micro level constituents that are responsible for causing hardness. Rather, the explanation would depend on in the micro level explanation. The explanation would depend on the atomic or the molecular elements of the matter functioning at the lattice structure of the table and making that object what it is. Scientific explanations are from a third person point of view, whereas the experience of table as a table in the commonsensical term is from a first person point of view. For Searle, these views are necessary in order to have a comprehensive understanding of reality. Moreover, I would like to say that the two explanations or explanation, the levels of explanation also show a causal asymmetry between the mental and the physical. The asymmetry discloses the causal function that operates in two different levels. One pertains to the realm of the mental, of the mind, and other manifests in various features of the structure of human experience. The Searlean notion of irreducibility should not be interpreted as a source of entailing substance dualism. Rather, the causal asymmetry unfolds an asymmetrical dependency. That is to say, both mental and the physical are asymmetrically depending on each other, with their respective powers and their operations in their respective levels without substantially getting reduced to one another. However, how far this notion of asymmetrical dependency is acceptable? The question remains valid so far as Searle's reliance on naturalism is concerned. More importantly, it also demands a clarification concerning the functional autonomy of the mind that is ensures or that is ensured by the argument against reductionism. John Hale constitutes the asymmetric relation as a metaphysical dependency. It is different from the causal dependence. And for instance, the dependence on human life and life on oxygen or the availability of oxygen is a case of causal dependency. Compare dependency of this sort with, for instance, a boat as a whole and its constituent wooden planks. This is a case of metaphysical dependency where the boat can continue to exist when none of its parts exist. The metaphysical dependence reveals that the existence of the mind can be directly conceived from that of the body. That is, mind exists autonomously despite its causal dependence on the body. The unique feature of the mind is that it is a complete unit having its own faculties like imagination, memory, thinking as a whole, etc. Moreover, the function of mind can be conceived without giving much importance to bodily function. We mean the possibility of mind functioning independently, and its feature can be logically ruled out. Cannot be logically ruled out. Searle is silent on this metaphysical conception of the function of the mind because naturalism is causally self-contained theory. What kind of change is expected when an individual agent performs a voluntary action? The performance of voluntary action occupies a central theme of Searle's theory of speech act. Every voluntary expression of speech is unique because it changes, because it has the power to bring out changes on an existing condition or a state of affairs. The speech embodies an intentional force which with a deontic powers. This is a term the Searle uses called deontic powers. According to Searle, human intentionality involves this deontic power that constitutes the normative element of action. For instance, declaration, promises, assertions, etc. are intentionally connected to the person's psychological condition, and the will. The will that brings out the normative action is intrinsic to the individuality of the person. I quote Wittgenstein here, who writes, the understanding of a command before executing it is related to the volition of a piece of behavior because behavior before carrying out it, unquote. Understanding one's thoughts and representation in the form of a statement unfolds the notion of self-consciousness. One is conscious of the fact that he or she is willingly making a promise and understand the content of the statement of promise. That is, a person understands what is being intended by him or her. This understanding further discloses to us that intentionality functions not only in the realm of experience but also in the realm of communication. Communication is an intentional field in which the self and its other are intentionally connected. This intentional field is normative as well as this intentional field is normative as well because the space of communication is grounded on the deontic power of the normativity. Normativity is based on the deontic power of human intentionality triggers in our responses to the world. These responses are articulated with a sense of commitment and obligation. The failure or the breach in communication is not merely a misfire, as Austin says to us, that causes dissatisfaction. Instead, it fractures the moral space, as claims Charles Taylor, in which humanity has built institutions. The collapse of institutions erodes the very foundation of morality in which society is regulated. Searle claims that institutions are built on the intentional deontic power of human consciousness, in which, I quote, X counts as Y in the context C. That is the logic of how the institutions are or institutional norms are created. For instance, a currency of $100 is acceptable because it is promised to have the value of $100. In some exceptional circumstances, for example, if it is demonetized, then it loses its value. To understand the function of the social institution and the normative features which supports this institutional foundation, we need to look at how intentional attitude of constitutive rules operate. That is, how do we mean X as Y? The semantic ability does take us back to the realm of self-consciousness, the creative aspect of human intentionality that operates with a purpose. Explanation of intentional action has a teleological feature, as Searle emphasizes that the content of the thought can be experienced in the mode of intention in action. However, his naturalism does not explicitly support the view of the experience of meaning or content in the mode of self-consciousness. Instead, he is silent about it. There are many such walls of silence in Searle's philosophy. It is possibly due to his ardent adherence to naturalism. Philosophers are committed to scientific explanation, and this commitment sometimes is overwhelming. We may need to return to an alternative rationality that conceives the ontology of human beings not as brute facts, but rather as a source of the reason that frees us from the wave of crude naturalism. The ontology of human existence, therefore, need not be only mapped with the help of causal powers. rather by reason that has the power of transcending the realm of causality. This transcendence would create a space of metaphysics of consciousness for understanding consciousness. It may sometimes be necessary to resort to silence. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm done with the paper.
Rajiv sir, unmute yourself.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very, very much, sir. Thank you very much for your thought-provoking and so informative, and you can say, we can say, it is innovative idea sharing with us. So really, it will help us lot and lot. And your thought was so shining and so sharp like diamond from a dimensional approaches. So thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful talk. Now our seminar hall is open for discussion. Yes, sir. Gangadhar sir. Sir, pranam, sir.
Namaskar, namaskar.
Yes.
Ashirwad, Ashirwad. I am very happy today. I think the department, very good scholars on Wittgenstein are gathered. So this is my hope. The department will rise to the up. I have heard very properly the speakers on Wittgenstein, and I hope that he must be aware of the new book on Wittgenstein by Ashok Bohra. And maybe it is on consciousness itself. And I feel that whatever, in fact, I do not agree with all the points of Wittgenstein, because he is a linguistic scholar, very good scholar in the West nowadays. From several times back, we are teaching Wittgenstein and this and that. But for me, as a student of philosophy of religion, I find some difficulty in Wittgenstein that everywhere he is speaking about linguistic analysis, language game. But here the point has been chosen, the consciousness. With what kind of consciousness Wittgenstein intends? Is there only the consciousness, mental consciousness, which forms the language, or if whether he agrees or not, the internal consciousness, inner consciousness, which is an energetic power within us, within human mind, within human body. I won't say human mind. I would say human body or humanness itself. So please throw some light on this point of consciousness. Also, the very popular criticism around regarding solipsism of Wittgenstein, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Very popular. Everybody speaks on this, and I feel that solipsism is the very crux of Wittgenstein's philosophy. He has narrated in his books that consciousness at the level of linguistic analysis. But there is philosophically properly, and that is ontological philosophy specifically, that there is inner consciousness, which brings energy from within us to speak out regarding the nature of reality. That's all. I again congratulate all these speakers who are gathered here in the department. Durgas, I am saying, the new Rajiv Lochan is here, and many of them I do not know the name. Today itself I have been introduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your critical question. I think I would like to request Professor Panda to reply.
Thank you, Professor Gangadhar, for an enlightening question. Yes, the voice of Wittgenstein is very explicit in this paper, because I've been though using the term silence from an Wittgensteinian point of view, and concluded the notion of silence in that sense, so far as explanation of consciousness is concerned. Um, Wittgenstein silence doesn't resort to any kind of solipsism. I don't know. This is for the first time I'm saying Wittgenstein is actually trying to answer to solipsism. Um, I mean, and particularly in the later writings, this is very clear when he talks about the impossibility of a private language argument. So Wittgenstein's silence in the first um, part of his philosophy, of what we call early Wittgenstein, is to draw a limit um, to this idea that what could be really expressed in language, and what is beyond the language. And here the language is the language of logic. So the logic, or the logical language, has a limit. And so far as the form of the logic is concerned, or if you look at the logic that actually helps us, the logical form, as he calls, helps us in forming expressions, very perspicuous expressions, but the form itself transcend the expressions. So logic is also transcendental for Wittgenstein, because it cannot be. We can only show how it works.
Intervening,
So
whether Wittgenstein is able to speak on supra consciousness, supra linguistic consciousness, supra mental consciousness. So,
yeah, I mean, I do not know whether we need a supra consciousness at all. That would be really very higher notion of consciousness.
philosophy is not perfect without taking all the in totality. And these days, holistic life is being highlighted very much. So, in the light of that, can we argue with Wittgenstein that something that is supra rational is within us? It is not possible to put all the things within a limited sense of linguistic analysis.
Yes, very true. And in fact, he would direct us in that, on that path of understanding the possibility of such a consciousness. But he himself, there are many insights one can gather from Wittgenstein, where he would possibly, guide us in that direction of understanding a holistic notion of consciousness. So, but he himself doesn't explicitly states about it. But he clearly thereby tells us that now what is the limit of expressing such consciousness in language. So once the limit is drawn, then you can talk about the possibility beyond the given. So I think that is what he is hinting at, to understand that possibility, as well as what has been given to us. I think that's more important for me. And when we there is another very interesting point which you mentioned, is about how consciousness is part of human life. And Wittgenstein does talk about that in the later works, particularly when he talks about language game, as you said. Language game is essentially related with forms of life. So when he talks about whether, when somebody says, what if the lion speaks to you, then he said, I will not just understand the lion, because lion would have a different form of life. So in a similar note, when or a similar tone, when Denetis asked this question, he said, I would understand the lion better. So the naturalist conception of consciousness is to explain consciousness scientifically, but by explaining consciousness, are we able to understand human being? Are you really making a kind of a step towards understanding human being, or we are making a step towards controlling human being? So what is the approach we are going to adopt? That is, I think, more important to investigate. And these are all maybe not metaphysical question, but these are all normative ethical questions. So where does it actually, what is the purpose of such knowledge is more important. Yes, I think so. Therefore, now Wittgenstein would talk about, let us limit ourselves with the human form of life and try to understand the form of life more closely. That possibly would disclose what consciousness is and what kind of potential it has. So therefore, form of life is a very important concept for all of us.
Thank you so much, sir, for your elaboration of this answer. So we are so beneficial.
There is someone, Rajneesh Mishra ji has written a question on the chat box.
Yes, sir. Please, you can proceed.
So I could just see the question, and the question goes like this: how consciousness and phenomenal world attach or interact to each other? How consciousness become a matter of religion, culture, ethics, or vice versa, and builds up amazing phenomena such as religious consciousness, cultural consciousness, and so on. Yeah, I mean, yes, that is, I think, very interesting question. Searle has a very interesting concept called the direction of fate. He says that intentionality is not just directed from mind to the world, but also self-referential, as I pointed out. It is also directed from world to the mind. So when we talk about human world interaction, sorry, when we speak about human and the world interaction, this interaction is an intentional interaction. And so far as religion, culture, ethics, etc., are concerned, and when we talk about religion as an institution, so you could see how forcefully now it controls the community who follows that particular religion. So one could see how intentionality is operating from religion in controlling human behaviors or human conduct. So that is a form of intentionality. But to understand that how that institution has been formed, we need to look at the basic logic of the constitutive rules that he talks about. X count as Y in the context C. So once you understand that logic, then you would know how the institutions are formed. So institutions certainly have certain deontic power, and their engagements are intentional as your engagement with the world while performing any voluntary action. So therefore, consciousness is intentionally connected to the phenomenal world. And but yes, if someone asks, that where is this intentionality is coming from, then Searle has a naturalistic response to that question, because for Searle, this intentionality is derived from the brain processes. So therefore, there is a causal root to this intentionality, whereas the phenomenological account of intentionality is very, very different. The source of intentionality is consciousness itself. So there are two theories to this.
I wonder, can I speak two
Yes,
moments?
please.
I wonder that how you use religion as institution. There can be institution religious or non-religious or secular religious, but not institution. I wonder in what sense Wittgenstein uses this word religion as
Of course,
institution.
Wittgenstein.
I'm sorry that I hope that
I understand your question. Wittgenstein has two different conception of religion. Actually, he is critiquing religious institutions. At the same time, he says, I cannot see things. I always see things from a religious point of view. So the religious point of view of understanding the reality is very different from his critique to the Western Christianity or the religion. So there are two different way in which religion is is to be understood in Wittgenstein. So one has a spiritual connotation where there is a freedom to to the subject or the individual or the person. A person is free to be religious, whereas in the religious institutions, if you are part of the religious institutions, then your code of conduct will be actually in accordance with the norms of that religion. You cannot do otherwise. I mean, people will every religion has its own conduct. Now, when religions operate as institutions, they're very powerful. So I am sure you must be knowing about the power of religion as an institution.
Thank you very much. Okay, go on. Carry on.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we'll invite another questions, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you for such a wonderful lecture. We are very delighted and very much happy to heard you about it, sir. My first question is that we are often talking about the silence of biological naturalists over the notion of consciousness. But
Yes,
what
please.
about its opposite, the silence of philosophers, religious thinkers, and so on over the notion of consciousness? Take for an instance the notion of circularity, which John Searle himself talks about, that how to overcome this circularity which philosopher and religious thinkers often creates, like consciousness in itself, consciousness knows itself. So this, how to overcome this circularity which philosopher and religious thinkers himself causes in one way or another. And in a similar way, as Professor Gangadhar also talked about, my question is that, when Immanuel Kant in Critique of Pure Reason says that what things may be in themselves I know not and need not know, because a thing is never presented to me otherwise than as a phenomenon. So like when we are not able to comprehend the notion of consciousness as an object, when it cannot become a kind of philosophical object to us, why we are so much stubborn to comprehend this thing? So these are two questions which I would like to ask you, sir.
Thank you, Rajanji. See, there are different models altogether for the philosophers and for some philosophers, and for some philosophers who ascribe to a scientific explanation of the reality. So for them, consciousness is an object. Brain is an object for them. Is not it? So Searle's commitment to naturalism is very, very strong, and therefore he would find the explanation given from, say, for example, a Vedantic point of view or from a phenomenological point of view, where consciousness is the very foundation of all knowledge claims. So consciousness is not an object at all. Okay, so in that sense, Searle would find, or any naturalist would find it, phenomenological explanation of consciousness is circular. So circularity is something, something which they do not like at all, because science doesn't believe in a circular explanation of objects or the reality. So science would always try to find out the cause of things. Hence, they resort to a causal explanation. And therefore, the ultimate ontology question if is raised for Searle or for any naturalist, because see, the naturalism is a very, very broad term. So the biological naturalism also collapses to physicalism. Okay, so so therefore the ontology is ultimately physical for them, and by saying this, they do not, they are comfortable, and they do not really commit to any kind of fallacy. So, and so also, the fallacy of circular explanation. So so that is for them, that is actually virtue. But when you try to locate it from a phenomenological or Indian perspective, where consciousness is found as real, then you will always find no route to escape from that circularity. And so if we have a circular vision, one way to interpret the circularity is to widen this realm of the horizon of consciousness. You must be knowing about the phenomenological notion of horizon, and how horizontally you could expand the notion of consciousness. So I think there is some depth in that way of understanding consciousness. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to our audience to ask.
Am I clear, Rajan?
Yes, sir, almost. Sir, in a similar way, I would like to add one more, question or a comment in that area. Sir,
Okay.
if we follow this approach, then we have to accept the consciousness as a fundamental reality or fundamental nature of the world. So then again, a question arises on philosopher and on religious thinker. This is that if the notion of non-physical consciousness occurs, then it echoes the belief of many religious in any immaterial soul, for which the body is only a temporal cell. If we accept
Body is
immaterial soul or body is the only temporal cell,
temporal.
temporary cell which we transcend.
Temporary, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Finite.
if we accept this, then another problem emerges, that how can a non-physical mind have any interaction with the physical body? If the mind has no shape, weight or motion, how can it move your muscle? Or if we assume it can, why it can move why it can move only your body and not of others? So this problem also occurs in front of philosopher and religious thinkers who believe that soul or mind is something independent of mind. Like, how does it move our muscles and our body only and not of others if it has an independent existence?
No, there is no harm in talking about there is no soul. Who is saying there is a harm? Only you are saying it is a harm, is not it? Naturalists do not fall into that trap at all. They say there is nothing called consciousness, which this which has a mystical connotation, like this. The religious thinkers, they don't have that burden of consciousness. Only you have a burden of consciousness if you start thinking philosophically, is this real? Then you would know whether where to stop this doubt. Okay, so once you initiate this question philosophically about about understanding what consciousness is, then you would know where it is actually ultimately leading to. Does it end with this explanation that consciousness is brain processes and everything is bodily, and I'm not this hallucination, my experiences are only hallucinations, we are all living in hallucinations? So who is saying that? Now many people like Anil Seth and many others who are trying to say it is a kind of a controlled hallucination. Okay, all these experiences are controlled hallucinations. They're controlled by my neurological processes, and there is nothing called me which is controlling my actions. That's fine. I mean, so we are all just nothing but functional entities. We are just functioning. Is not it? We happen to function like the way we are. Are we like that? So the question is, are we just mere functional entities? Okay, or are we free, can make some judgment about ourselves, make some move? I mean, this move is actually to perform some voluntary action. So where do we understand this power of freedom? What kind of consciousness or what kind of experience actually compelling us to understand that I am different from him, I am same as him? So this identity and difference relation is where, otherwise everything is explicitly clear to the naturalist. And where do these questions stand actually? Is not it? So philosophers' way of understanding the question concerning consciousness will be different from a scientific or scientifically influenced theories of understanding consciousness. Is not it?
Thank you, sir.
So
Thank you, sir.
that's where my question is whether this explanation of consciousness is happening. I mean, if you look at the data science and all that, the big data theories and all that, are these to control human beings or to empower human beings? Are they enlightening the humans? Are they making several Buddhas out of it? Or they are just to control the humanity? Where actually this leading to? No? You must ask this question as a philosopher.
Thank you so much, sir. Now my wife, Dr. Simi CM, has raised her hand.
Okay.
She is also a scholar of consciousness.
Yeah, I know,
So
I know.
please.
You, okay, Simi.
Please, Simi.
Yes. Namaste, sir. Thank you so
Namaskar.
much. It has been a very lucid explanation on biological naturalism. Actually, I really enjoyed your paper, sir.
Thank you.
I just want to know whether any kind of such a similarity can be seen in the Indian perspective, in Indian theories of consciousness. That is the
No, I
one
mean,
question, means one
yeah, one can look
query.
at it Charvaka's theory of
Yeah,
consciousness, a
yes, yes.
materialist philosophy.
Yeah. And again, I just want to know one more thing. Being a naturalist philosopher, John Searle, he already posting in the camp of non-reductivist perspective, isn't it, sir? Like Chalmers
Yes,
and
that
all.
is,
So, what is the crux of his theory, his thought that put him in the non-reductive camp? And
yes.
another thing also, just Rajan was asking, and you are replying to him. I'm just
Mm.
connecting one thing. We only the philosopher can analyze what consciousness can do rather than what consciousness is. The science and neuroscience perspective, everybody is explaining consciousness such and such, but we philosopher can explain in a little bit more that consciousness is such an entity, it can do much more. Okay, sir, that was my analysis, and that was my question. Could you please answer? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Simi, for these
Yeah.
questions. Yeah, I mean, Searle is typically, I mean, he, as I mentioned in my paper, we cannot really put him in any particular camp of philosophers. So he is not a dualist. He claims that he is not a dualist.
Yes.
Some critics say that he is a property dualist. But he himself says, "Not, I am not a property dualist." For him, consciousness is not a property of brain process. He never claims that it is a property of brain process. He says it's a feature of brain process. So the feature is actually is become very complex when you have different sense of its properties or functions. Say, for example, I talked about subjectivity, phenomenal consciousness, prospectivity, first person point of view, unity of consciousness, and he has 12 such features. Now, when you look at, and he says that once consciousness is produced, then it has its own life. Now, I'm just quoting certain terms. Now, to say that it has its own life is to talk about a realm of function of consciousness where mind is conceptualized as an irreducible phenomena for him. Now, to say that, now he is again showing us some kind of dualism, in his theory. So, therefore, though he's very critical to reductionist. So I would call him a biological functionalist. No, because ultimately in his later works, not in the discovery of mind, but in his later works, when he writes about realism, and corresponding to his theory of social ontology, he says that intentionality is ultimately physical. Okay, so but how we understand this intentionality, which is operating at the realm of the social and the mental, is more important. For him, if we try to trace the ontology of intentionality, like that table example he gives, the things at its lattice structure and things at a macro level are two different, demands two different explanations. So maybe the philosophical viewpoint or philosophical theorizations or perspectives are at a macro level. Now the question is whether that macro level theorization of consciousness is real, or it is only a kind of a logical construction. So is this the idea that the Indian philosophers, when they talk about Brahman, or they talk about an universal consciousness called Purusha, is this a logical construction, or they take it as kind of a reality? I think there lies the difficulty. So we cannot really treat Searle's theory at par with these kind of philosophies that we have, but it certainly enlightens us in a direction where he tries to separate out the limits of scientific explanation and the perspective of a reality which we all are part of. So I think that's very significant in Searle. So what consciousness can do, possibly we cannot really map what it can do, is not it? Any kind of possibility will further show a limit and something beyond that, is not it? So what an individual can do, can we predict? He can do just otherwise, is not it? That's what the Wittgensteinian question. Okay, so we cannot really predict an individual entirely, because of this element of freedom or intention, or what you call the will that the individual possesses. So, and I think that there lies some philosophy, and no, we could look at it that
Obviously, sir.
from
Obviously, correct,
philosophical
correct. Yeah,
perspective. The
sure,
richness
sure.
of philosophy lies there in talking about what can it do, as you rightly said. So the can question can be very critically delved into, and if you look at that critically, then it ignites me further asking this question: can we really predict um, the nature of the self or the nature of a person entirely? So with all pattern of behavior and all kind of data that you have about me stored in a machine, still I think there will be a possibility of just disowning what I so that possibility cannot be ruled out. I think there lies the ability of consciousness making further move with its own
Yes, sir.
intentionality.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Sure, sir. Sure. Actually, the concern was mine. Uh, if what can means what consciousness can do, in the sense that what will be the features that you already have mentioned, the possibilities of
Consciousness
consciousness.
has
In that sense, we can. I mean,
conscious
yeah.
that question, that you can see the multiple forms of life in which humans live, and ultimately the human form of life per se, quote and
Mm-hmm.
unquote, is something very very rich. I mean, that has given birth to science, that has given birth to religion and
Yes.
culture, what not.
Yes.
Even the science is a product of that
This all.
consciousness, is
Yes,
not it?
sir. Obviously. Obviously. Yeah.
Obviously. So
Mm-hmm.
if that is true, um, then I mean, I think
Yes.
we cannot really map its
Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
its features. So and say that this is what it is. No, I don't think that such a closure can be
No. No. No.
put
We
to
cannot. We cannot.
consciousness. Yeah,
Yes. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you so
most
much, sir.
welcome.
Now we have just 2 minutes, so we expect only one question.
Yes, sir. Again, I would like to ask if I'm allowed, sir.
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Yeah, thank you. Sir, it is basically a hypothetical question, or to say a thought experiment, which I would like also request to Professor Sahu sir, that in his upcoming lecture he would also inculcate this thing. Sir, take for an instance, as science in the modern time talking about in a fictional sense, that memory uploading is possible, or that cloning of something is possible. So suppose if we clone a mind of a person, take for instance, if we clone the mind of Professor D. A. Gangadhar sir, neuron by neuron, then an atom by atom, and we also upload that life experience or that memory in that cloning mind, in that copied mind, then will that cloning mind be experiencing the same experience which Professor D. A. Gangadhar have felt throughout his life, when we have already uploaded all the memories? Then will that thing be provide us the solution of the immortality? Then will can we become the immortal throughout our life, since we have already uploaded the consciousness and we are constantly uploading the data and so on? So what would you say about this immortality of consciousness by uploading the data and cloning the mind in some sense?
Yes. So, Sal, there are two answers possible here. For Searle, if you look at it from Searle's point of view, what Searle's explanation is to this question. So there is a question to this, and now Searle is answering exactly to the same question. If the neuron by neuron is actually transplanted in another physical system, then whether the physical system will have experience at all. For Searle, the answer is no. Okay, even that micro transplantation or nano level transplantation happens, answer is no. Then the other question is my response, my way of understanding it. Even if two, machines are created, okay, or two biological beings are cloned, okay, but two biological cloned entities will look at the world too differently if they are living conscious beings. If there are two even dogs, who are cloned exactly, okay, but if you look at their interaction with the world, it is possible that they will act little differently, they are not identically. That's possibility, because the world is such. Yes, there's
Thank you,
someone.
sir. Thank you, sir. Now, we have only one question. Professor Satish Chandra Dubey, sir.
Abhinav ji has raised his hand. You can ask no question.
Professor Satish
I'm
Chandra
not
Dubey,
tired.
sir, has raised his hand.
Pardon?
So, sir, Professor Satish Chandra Dubey, sir, has raised
Sir.
his
Sir.
hand.
Sir.
Sir, please.
Yes, sir.
Sir, please.
I think Abhinav Tiwari ji had a question. He was raising his hand. I could see him in the video.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
So this is very intriguing lecture. I'm very much fascinated by your thought. And there is one thing, sir, I'm very much concerned about the ontology, particularly the study of being. Throughout millennia, philosophers have argued that the two most puzzling things, either the nature of mystery of this nature and mystery of oneself, two conundrum have always been a nightmare for the philosophers. But I do think, sir, ontology is a study of being in holistic way rather than a partial expression of one's being, as W.B. Coyne in naturalistic epistemology is trying to comprehend the nature of ontology, but he could not take the onus on his own shoulder, and he has tried to pass the buck, and then logical positivists they have took on his own shoulder, but they have not. They couldn't resolve actually the issue of consciousness, because again the problem of qualia, as we have seen in inverted spectrum and the zombie argument, the problem of qualia is still lurking in the ambush, and it is still actually haunts the philosophers. So my question is that what does it mean when John Searle says that ontological study of consciousness could resolve the study of qualia, and to some extent, and when he endorses the biological naturalism, and by saying that it could, to some extent, it could make a recalcitrant, and to some extent, it does resolve the issue of qualia in the terms of subjectivity and objectivity. Because I see that ontology is a study of being in a holistic way, and it constitutes the synthesis of subjectivity and objectivity in a holistic way. And it seems very, to some extent, it's a sort of conundrum for me, because philosophers have developed a certain tendency to see the things in a very bipartite way, like good or bad, or to some extent, this is the solution, this is the problem. We have to cultivate certain tendency that we have to see the problems in holistic way rather than in partial way. Otherwise, it would be very fallacious to make a proclamation that this is the final solution of a perennial problem. As we philosophers and the community of philosophers, they have raised a certain issue. Thank you, sir.
See, it is easy to, Abhinav, it is easy to say that, to see holistically, it's very easy to say that, I think, but it is not that easy to understand the depth of that wholeness. I think people struggle, have struggled life long to understand a bit of it. Say, for example, if you look at Einstein, and when Einstein brings his new mechanics, he says, I have just got a little bit of that knowledge. Okay. Similarly, Tagore saying that how truth is related to human subjectivity, and I got a glimpse of that. So to understand, but yes, by understanding even a glimpse of it, one get a picture of the whole. That is the possibility. Now keep that in the background, keeping that in background. For Searle, yes, Searle is not a reductionist, as I was telling. He is a person who is, is a kind of a philosopher who is, in fact, talking about or forming arguments in favor of qualia. But when it comes to the question of subjectivity and objectivity, for him there are two different things. See, most of the time when he says, according to Searle, he says that if most of the time we confuse, and in our confusion we put the epistemological question in the basket of ontology. Okay. So that is the point he is making. He says subjectivity and objectivity are epistemological questions. So when science talks about objectivity, that's an epistemic question. Okay, for him. So or any assertion on subjectivity, when you say that I am speaking it from a first person point of view, for him that is typically an epistemological exercise. That's not an ontological exercise. And there where we can question that why Searle is saying that the first person ontology is absent. So one can question Searle's silence there. Why he says that it is only an epistemological question. So one who would like to critique Searle's biological naturalism, then he must ask this question, that why Searle is not isolating them, separating them. Okay. So but those who believe in the ontology of consciousness, that consciousness is real and it is not a product of any physical properties or any physical processes, or it has its own ontology. So for them, this separation is not necessary at all.
Yes, sir. Actually, sir, don't you think so that scientists, they have borrowed the metaphysical question and they have tried to cook their metaphysical question in their lab? And don't you think so
scientists
that
have their own agenda? See,
yeah,
science.
I understand that.
So
And don't you think
philosophers.
so that the problem of qualia leads them to inquire more about consciousness, sir? Because I do find that we are still in the same boat that has been pushed by the Tattvajnani, particularly Vedanti and the Western philosophy, Thales and Plato. I mean the pre-Socratic philosophers. I mean, we have consciousness, or either we entail consciousness, or we have consciousness. I mean, we are consciousness, or we have consciousness, or do we entail the consciousness? Three questions are still in the basket of metaphysician, and I think that scientists, they have borrowed such metaphysical questions, and they try to make a configuration about the nature of consciousness. That seems so puzzling to me, sir. Yeah, you can elaborate, sir. Thank you so much for your elaboration, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Now our question answer of this seminar is over. We should proceed our seminar to the next part of this seminar.
You said some professor is asking question. Before Vinav asked me question, some professor was asking question, some theory professor.
Okay, this is the last one, sir.
I can take question, no issue, if it's okay with you.
Okay, so we should proceed. So please you answer, sir.
I do not have any question. So I mean, you are saying that Professor Theory will be asking you question. So that is
okay,
what.
Sir. No problem, sir. Now its time is over. Okay. So we should proceed to our next part of this seminar.
Sure.
So on behalf of the Department of Philosophy of Religion philosophy and religion. I would like to invite Professor Gopal Sahu to put some light on this topic and should put light on our speaker's view. Sir, you are welcome to this session.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Professor Anand Mishra ji and his team to have started this Saturday seminar party. And in fact, as I feel, it is almost like a Saturday party, and everyone is eagerly waiting to take part in such a party, including me. So I thanks Professor Anand Mishra once again for giving me an opportunity to be a part of this party, this academic party. And also I thanks Dr. Rajiv ji for initiating or sending an invitation to me. And I also thank all the faculty member of the department, Professor S.P. Panda ji. Then I also thank Professor Gangadhar ji. I also thank Professor Durgas Chaudhary ji, who is the chairperson of this particular party. He is conducting this party. And also I thanks many other faculty members, including Niti Singh. He's one of my student also. So beside this, I saw in initial stage that Professor Ganesh Prasad Das was also there. He has left now. So I also thanks him. So I once again thanks everyone for giving me an opportunity to take part in this particular academic deliberation. I must thank Professor Ranjan Panda, who is also one of my friends. He's junior to me, and he has given coined a very catchy title and presented a very thought-provoking argumentation. So I must congratulate him. And I know that we should not go on continuing our party. Too much party is very bad for health also. So I will finish my presentation in 10 minutes. In next 10 minutes, I will simply relate some of my observation with that of the main themes of Professor Panda's presentation. And what I feel is that Professor Panda has made a case for the naturalization of consciousness through biology. And biology here, he is using in a very broad sense. And we know that biology can further be explained in terms of chemistry, and chemistry can further be explained in terms of physics. So here, what he is saying, biology, he is broadly saying a kind of physicalism. And that includes starting from biology through chemistry through physics. I have taken this particular liberty to interpret him very liberally. So he is making a case for naturalization of consciousness through physicalism. If we can say this, if he will permit, then I will say this. Now, what he has done, or he is trying to present, is that the voice of the physicalism is very, very vocal here. Whereas the silence of physicalism is very, very conspicuous. He has very, very elaborately discussed different voices of physicalism in throwing lights on consciousness. I did not go into that side, though I would like to simply mention that the investigation of the physics on the functioning, on the nature of consciousness is very, very interesting. It is very paying, and it is also very well accepted. So voice is very, 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 very vocal. We need not argue with that. What I will try to argue here is that the silence part of physicalism on consciousness. Here, my argument would be like it will be what can I say? I will raise 2 points here. The first point here is that the naturalization of consciousness, as Professor Panda is elaborating and defending or making a case of it within the very framework given by Saul, will lead to a kind of a kind of identity, not necessarily type identity, but definitely a kind of identity. And that particular identity has an inherent contradiction of dualism, not particularly property dualism. So what here I want to say here is that its silence is so conspicuous, so undesirable, that the whole process of naturalization of consciousness through physicalism collapse at one stage or others. In other sense, what I will try to argue is that naturalization of consciousness through biology, or that is through physicalism, fail to give a proper explanation of what consciousness is. And here I will take simply two problems of consciousness. The first problem is called what it feels like. That is, what is the first person phenomenal conscious sensation, and how that particular sensation, what I feel like, it's or points towards, or is represented by something other, external object. So these two problems are basically part of the qualia problem. I will not go into that. So what I am suggest that the the biological naturalism will fail to account for this two particular problem. Now, what I'm trying to say is that now the vocal part I will simply leave it here. How science has done extensive experiment, and how only science has the only hope for us to know what consciousness is. No speculative, no metaphysical, no more philosophical exercise will give you or throw lights on how mind function or how brain function. This is beyond the territory or jurisdiction of the philosopher. So we philosopher cannot go into that. So we have to rely on that. And that is very paying also. That particular kind of exercise is very, very instrumentally, very, very efficacious, not only for philosophy and explaining consciousness, but also it has got it is paying a lot of dividend in terms of health management and many other things, including our internet and our networking. Now, and we know that science has marched quite far ahead in this regard, and we have a very full-fledged account of consciousness in terms of some biological process. And presently, we can very much say that the pain, if pain is represented as a conscious experience, is nothing, is equivalent to, or is identical to firing. So this is what is the state of affairs. In this regard, the scientific expansion of the naturalization is very, very vocal. Now, coming to the silence part. Now, if we identify C firing or the pain experience, which has got the quality of intentionality and qualitativeness, phenomenality, and privacy, and many other things, in one sense has got the this qualia characteristic, then C is identical, the pain is identical with C firing. Now, this particular identity is basically a kind of a posteriori identity. Like when I say that C is identical to C firing, now I have to rely on the experimental part of the scientist to see how, in what sense C firing is identical to pain experience. And that can only be known through a posteriori experiment. So here comes the naturalization. Now, if we start with this, and that is why I argue that your naturalization has to begin with a kind of identical statement, and not definitely type identity or token identity, and identity, and that identity is basically a property identity, or so a posteriori identity. You have to find out the identity through the experiment, not through the speculation, not through the logical analysis, not through the conceptual apparatus or conceptual kind of exercise. Now, if you start with this, then you will see that this identity cannot be established logically because of certain crucial argument. One such argument is Zumbi argument, and Zumbi argument is a thought argument, thought experiment, where we can prove that we have some being like me who is just similar to me but has lacking or is lacking the quality of qualia or the qualitative feelings, or that is the intentionality and subjectivity, other thing. So that possibility is there. From this possibility, from this modal argument, we can very much say that even if we have a person's feeling of sensation of pain, but that sensation is not equivalent or identical to a particular C firing. So this can be very much proved. Secondly, the multiple reliability argument will further substantiate that even if there is an identity, that identity is multiply realized in many other physical position, physical stand. Now, if that is what is possible through the multiple realizability argument, then we can very much say that this identity is broken. The identity cannot be posteriorly established. And thirdly, if two states are identical in terms of properties, not in terms of the substance, then it is very much possible that the C firing and the pain experience or the pain experience are identical, but they are identical not in terms of substance, not in terms of properties. So ultimately, what it simply says is that the identity which the naturalization of consciousness start will apparently lead to a kind of dualism which defeats its purpose. So with this, I would say that, and Professor Ranjan Panda has also very explicitly said that Searles will not, he has rejected property dualism, dualism. He is not a dualist, and he, according to him, he is a kind of, he will advocate a kind of biological functionalism, and biological functionalism is a kind of, is a part of physicalism that includes your identity theory as well as behaviorism. And whether it is a biological functionalism or identity theory, it will lead to a kind of dualism, contrary to the starting point of naturalization. And as I said, I will conclude that, and this particular naturalization, the program of naturalization of consciousness is akin to the naturalization of epistemology by Quine in 1960s. And I don't know, I'm not much aware of the Searles literature. Probably it started with during that period. And we know that Quine's program of naturalization of epistemology miserably fails to account for the normativity of the epistemology by replacing the epistemic virtue or quality like justification, truth, and other things with the scientific concept of efficacy, instrumentality, probability, all these things. He has done the biggest disservice to epistemology. Similarly, I see a kind of potential disservice in the naturalization of the consciousness through biology, through chemistry, through physics, through functionalism. So with this, I conclude that the intentionality, and I will say that the naturalization of consciousness will rob the essentiality of consciousness very, very miserably. So I thanks the organizer, particularly Professor Anand Mishra ji and Dr. Rajiv ji, other faculty member of the department for giving me a chance. And I also thanks my friend Professor Ranjan Kumar Panda for to have presented a very, very complex, very, very intangible topic so lucidly, so forcefully, and so impactfully. So I once again thank everyone for listening to me and for giving me a chance. Over to Dr. Rajiv.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing some of your thought from your philosophic sagacious mind. Really, we are obliged to you. Now, I would like to invite our speaker to respond within within a minute. Sir, Professor Ranjan Panda, your mic is mute.
So, my response to Professor Gopal Sahu, I could not hear you much. Hello? I think there is some problem with your mic. Am I audible, Professor Pandey?
You are audible, Professor Panda.
What did Rajiv say to me? I could not hear. I think Rajiv has some issue with his connection. So, unfortunately, I
Sir,
could not hear.
you are requested to make few comments on the remarks of Professor Gopal Sahu.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, I think, yes. Whether I'm not very sure about whether Quine's naturalization of epistemology has done a disservice to philosophy. Yes, as we, if we, keep, there's so many questions on a holistic view, or a possibility of a holistic view was reiterated here. If that is the vision, then see, knowledge and proliferation of knowledge can go on any direction, whether it is naturalization or a scientific explanation of reality, that would benefit us. Say, for example, the revival of metaphysics in Wittgenstein, because Professor Gangadhar brought it to this discourse. See, it was a turn against the whole positivist assertions that, Russell's idea that yes, everything can be empirically explainable. So I think Wittgenstein would show a kind of a possibility that yes, that is not true. There is still yet we can talk about metaphysics with the help of logic and language. So similarly, when we find there are a lot of scientific, as Professor Sahu also explained to us, that we are benefited from the dividend that we get. Yes, if you look at the works of brain studies, particularly in the direction of say neurological diseases that has harmed the humanity so much, people are and brain studies has helped in that direction. So I think no, dividend is very, very explicit in the case of health and information technology, and so that is one thing. But it certainly also forces us, the philosophers or the philosophical community, to ask this normative question that I raised, that whether it is to control the human mind, or it is one mechanism of controlling the human mind, because we all know that the big data is not, everybody is talking about big data, and who has the big data, and the countries who have the big data, they're more powerful, they're more powerfully controlling many institutions, including the government of who will be elected. They can influence the people of that country. so much with their big data. So economic transactions, if you look at that, the trade and things like that, that has been controlled by this the data. So I think the moral question still remains on, and we can legitimately ask this question: who is doing what with this data? So explanation of consciousness in the form of duplication of human thoughts or human abilities or human conduct is or behavior or studying the pattern of behavior can definitely help us in many ways, predicting a situation of a market and things like that. But whether it really enriches us philosophically, whether it really enlightens the humanity, whether it really tells us how to cope with the struggle against pandemic, so that is where I think philosophers have to be very courageous in coming out and asking these questions, moral questions, and still talk about the hope for life. So and there I think the metaphysics actually surges in a different way to talk about life and the value of humanity. So I think that kind of holism is actually possible if both science and philosophy and other sciences can go together and providing hope for the humanity. So that would be a kind of philosophy which I would be part of. Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you, sir, for your response. Now, I would like to invite the president of the seminar, Professor Durgas Chaudhary. Sir, please preside the seminar. Sir. Professor Durgas Chaudhary. Sir.
Professor has to unmute himself. Yes.
Sorry. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Rajiv. I thank Professor Ranjan Kumar Panda ji and Professor Gopal Sahu ji for giving such wonderful discussion, explanation in the area of Sir's philosophy of mind. I am not competent to talk about his philosophy of mind in detail, actually, and also there is no time for all these things. Everything has been talked in detail here. My problem is just how philosophers of language, most of philosophers of language, turn to philosophy of mind. So this is not exactly not related, or you can say going inside your talk of consciousness. I am sorry for that. But for me, why philosophy of language ultimately needs philosophy of mind? So few years back, I read an article by Tyler Berg, who is stationed at University of California at Los Angeles, and the article was published in the Philosophical Review in January of 1992. Its name is The Philosophy of Language and Mind, 1950-1990. So there, he beautifully traces the development of philosophy of mind and why it needs philosophy of language and why it needs philosophy of mind. So at some point, according to his article, almost in later 70s, focus of most of philosophers of language went to philosophy of mind. Why? In philosophy of language, there are two schools. One was of formal language, another was of ordinary language, which was communication intention approach. So this philosopher, John Searle, was a student of this ordinary language philosophy. He was there as a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford, and there he was influenced by later Wittgenstein, Gilbert Ryle, J.L. Austin, also Noam Chomsky, who was in Harvard. So, and H.P. Grice, Paul Grice, who is champion of this communication intention approach. So, this approach, which is regarding ordinary language philosophy, we have to take into account our intentionality, our beliefs, our desires, all these things. And we have to explain all these things in order to understand language, or you can say in order to do something in philosophy of language. So most of the philosophers of language tended to work in philosophy of mind. So in this way, John Searle was also a philosopher of language in his early years. He wrote Speech Acts, which was a development of J.L. Austin's book, How to Do Things with Words. Speech Acts was published in, I think, 1969. And again, he published in 1979, Expression and Meaning. All these things belong to a philosophy of language. After that, because he thought that, and every philosopher of language who is working in ordinary language philosophy, who thought that there should be an explanation of this intentionality, this belief, this desire, all these things. Until we understand what these things are, we cannot understand properly our language. So in this way, in 1980, he published a paper in Behavioral and Brain Sciences that is epoch-making, Minds, Brains and Programs. And there this biological naturalism came into light. After that, in 1983, he again wrote a book, Intentionality, an Essay in Philosophy of Mind. Now his focus shifted to philosophy of mind. Then he tried to explain intentionality according to his own view. And in 1992, he published another book, The Rediscovery of Mind, which is again, to my mind, I can't say that I have read that book from A to Z, but I have seen that book. And in that book, he has criticized various theories of mind and tried to establish his own view, biological and naturalism. So where he distinguishes his position from materialism, from dualism, from computationalism, so all these things. And this book, The Rediscovery of Mind, he wrote, and in that book he says that this name is a homage to some Bruno Snell, who was a philologist in Germany, and his book's name was The Discovery of Mind. In that tone, he titled his book The Rediscovery of Mind. So, and in that book, I have found that he is criticizing many theories of mind. So again, after that, he wrote several books. I don't remember all those books. But before this 1992 book, in 1990, he had written The Mystery of Consciousness. So consciousness, intentionality, and all these things which are part of consciousness, beliefs, desires, etc., these are very essential if we want to understand our language fully. But here again, this problem, this great problem of consciousness, which is to my mind, nobody, no philosopher, no scientist has satisfactorily explained, as I think. So there is incomplete explanations in everywhere. But this Searle's explanation, his name biological naturalism, it soothes me in comparison to computationalism, which says that we can reduplicate mind. I don't believe, but I have no argument. A strong AI, which was opposed by this John Searle. So all these things are there. And about consciousness, I am not an expert in that field. I can't say anything. But to my mind, John Searle's this approach is satisfactory, but there are things which are unexplainable, and this problem is so hard in my understanding. This is the hardest problem in philosophy. This is the hardest nut to crack. Every other thing, though all philosophical problems are hard, but this is the hardest to my mind, and I have not studied well this problem of consciousness, so I'm sorry. But all these things are, when I tried to say something about, because my friend Anand asked me to do this, so I had to do it. So I think this Searle's approach is satisfactory, but it no approach, and his approach is also, it is not explaining everything what we want to know. So there is some, you can say, as Professor Panda said, there are silences of biological naturalism. And if we don't have, this is my firm faith, that if we don't have anything to tell you meaningfully, then I should be silent. So it is not his view's fault, but there are many things which are unexplainable till now. So there may be silences, and that is permissible. So in this way, I want to say only this. I'm not an expert in philosophy of mind, and sorry for that. So these things are an interesting discussion was there. Panda sir's lecture was very interesting, illuminating. I could not fully understand what he said because I have nothing in written. So all these things, I am thankful to Professor Pandaji and Professor Sahuji and all scholars who are present here and listening to this wonderful lecture of Pandaji and this participating in this seminar. Thank you, Ranjan.
Thank you so much, sir, for your good remarks on the topic as well as the view of speaker. Now I would like to invite Dr. Neeti Singh to present the vote of thanks of the seminar. Ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajiv Lochan Behera, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Neeti Singh, an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religion, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. And this is the time to say thanks to the eminent speakers of philosophy who are here with us in today's session of Saturday seminar. So let me extend my warm regards firstly to Professor Durgas Chaudhary, sir, who has chaired this session. I thank you, sir, for your precious time, remarks, and gracious presence in the seminar as the chairperson. It's always a pleasure to see and hear you, sir. Thank you so much. And I extend my heartfelt thanks to the speaker of the session, Professor Ranjan Kumar Panda, sir, for presenting such an insightful paper on the topic biological naturalism, its voice and silence on consciousness. So the paper was indeed a successful attempt to see certain philosophical issues in the field of philosophy of mind. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us as the speaker of the session and delivering a wonderful paper and a fruitful discussion on the same. And it was really fantastic experience to see the way you defended your position and answered the questions. So I'm really thankful to you, and you made this session successful. So thank you so much, sir. We have another esteemed scholar of philosophy of mind, Professor Gopal Sahu, sir. And it is my pleasure to say a few words before my own teacher, who has taught me in my post-graduation, though these few words are merely of thanks. So thank you so much, sir, that you are here and you have given wonderful remarks over the discussion and paper of Professor Panda, sir. And you are here as a guest of honor in the seminar. So I'm really overwhelmed to see you here, sir. Thank you so much for being with us. And I'm also thankful to our head of the department, Professor Anand Mishra, sir, for initiating this amazing academic program called Saturday Seminar that takes place on each Saturday. And you are always there with us to inspire us to come up with new ideas, which could enhance the quality of the academic activities in the department. So thank you so much, sir. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Dr. Rajiv Lochan Behera, my colleague and one of my friends here, for convening this session and assigning me the duty to give word of thanks at the end of the session. So thank you so much, sir. And as I can see that Professor Gangadhar, sir, is constantly here as an active participant, and I must say that he's very enthusiastic listener. So thank you so much, sir, for being with us. And there are a few names I could see on the screen. So let me tell you all that these are some professors and our colleagues. And I want to say thanks to all of them. So Professor Abhimanyu Singh, sir, Professor G.P. Das, sir, Professor D.B. Chaudhary, sir, Professor S.P. Pandey, sir, Professor S.C. Dubey, sir, Dr. Alok Tandon, sir, Dr. Grace Darling, ma'am, Dr. Baleshwar Prasad, sir, Dr. Vivek Pandey, sir, Dr. Kalpana Yadav, ma'am, Dr. Rahul Kumar Maurya, sir, Dr. Dharmjang, sir, and Dr. Shimi. I thank you all. And now, last but certainly not the least, I extend my thanks to all the scholars, philosophers as well as philodoxes, for attending the seminar and taking active participation in the discussion. The seminar is meant for you, so your participation is much appreciated. Thank you one and all. And over to you, Behera, sir. Thank you so much.
Now, thank you all. And I think I need the permission of our head to end up this session or this seminar.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rajiv. It was nice meeting you all, though virtually, but yes, I indeed feel great to be part of this occasion. And I thank from my bottom of my heart to all of you for listening to me and asking some questions, reflecting on my thought. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for giving this opportunity.
Yes, now the seminar is end.
Bye. Okay, Rajiv. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Pranam.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary. Yeah. Thank you, Gopal Bhai. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ranjan.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. Sri Prakash Pandey, I think, is left.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Anand sir, namaskar, and thank you very much. Yeah.
आपको भी नमस्कार, रंजन जी.
Thank you. Thank you. Pratibha has joined. Thank you, Pratibha. It is wonderful. I'm just seeing your name.